On this episode of The Badge and Beyond, we may be discussing domestic violence, mental health issues, suicide, and self-harm.
If you would like support and someone to talk to, the right avenues in your local area would be appreciated for you to have a look at those options. Please make use of avenues such as Lifeline on 13 11 14 and also for domestic violence hotline 1-800-RESPECT. So viewer and listening discretion is advised.
Welcome to The Badge and Beyond, everybody. Today we are proudly sponsored by IC Technology and Precision Integrity. You will find Precision Integrity at privateinvestigatorsydney.com.au. Today we're going to talk to you about some of our experiences with death. It's kind of a routine thing in frontline services, unfortunately, and everybody responds differently and everybody sees different things. I think let's jump straight into it. Danny, tell us one of your experiences with death from your time in the cops.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I experienced death really early as my first week, possibly like third or fourth shift. And it was a pretty horrific one. It's the original sort of TikTok that I came out with, whereby prior to that, I'd never really seen a dead body in real life before. I'd had distant relatives pass away, but we never actually had seen sort of a dead body in situ. So we were at the actual police station, again, like 3 or 4 shifts in. It was a day shift, and I remember it was HSC time. So students were doing, obviously studying for their HSC. And a job came over the air for initially 2 people fighting, and then really quickly after that, man armed with a knife, and then there's a stabbing, right? Now the original call gave us a location that was a street away from where the station is. So I just remember everyone just jumps out and starts running because you're not going to drive there. It's a quick run, so to speak. And I remember, you remember the first set of radios they gave us, the massive Motorola's on a pouch, and then you still had the big extended sort of coil.
If you were lucky enough to get the handset that...
Yeah. And then you get one between 2 because we haven't got enough.
Yeah.
Right, it's just hilarious. I'll take the radio, you take... Yeah.
Because partners never split up in
No,
a
of
foot
course
pursuit
not.
or in different parts of the
course
house
not.
or out of line of sight of each
Why would you
other.
want to give every police officer a radio? It's only a
Crazy
lifeline.
talk.
Only a lifeline. Anyway, I remember running out, and as soon as I ran out, the radio flicks off the lapel and it just starts falling. I remember kicking it to bring it back up. I was like pretty impressed with myself, and caught it again. Just ran with it. And as they were broadcasting the job, they worked out that they gave us the wrong side. So that all we actually had to do was run across the driveway, and it was right there. So by the time we've worked out, we've done like a kind of a U-turn and run back down because it's quicker to go this way. One of the other crews, because we had beat crews in those days because it was during the Olympics.
What's a beat crew, Danny? Explain.
So a beat crew was basically you're on foot, so you and your partner. We were actually in teams of 3 and 4. So there'd be like a trio of officers walking the local area together, a designated suburb or hotspot, and we just walk the streets, talking to people and responding to jobs. So you weren't actually in a vehicle. So there was a beat crew not too far, and they got there first. And I remember one of the officers who's out of my class, who's also quite new, actually got there while the offender was still on top of the victim, stabbing him with a knife. And as I turn up, I just see him use his baton and knock the knife out of his hand. It's a good shot. So then we all tackle the offender, and there was enough of us. So I get off and go towards the victim, and the victim's in a bad way. There was like a lot of stab wounds, and so you're trying to sort of control the bleeding, and the ambulance obviously hadn't turned up yet, and there was just girls screaming because there was a local girls' high school, because it happened right on the grounds of the library. So in the car park of the library, where students are coming in and coming out during HSC time, it was pretty traumatic So a lot of these Year 12 girls would have seen the whole incident, and they were eyewitnesses, because we ended up escorting them and staying with them to give statements and things like that. And I remember picking 2 or 3 wounds I could try to sort of get a hold on, because the blood was arterial, it was profusely sort of bleeding out. And I remember him saying to me, I'm going to die, aren't I? And I'm like, no, mate, you're right. The ambos will be here soon.
Yeah, you never tell someone, it's coming. That's like...
And I just remember thinking, I've got to try to put pressure and sort of thing. And as the ambos turn off, I could, like, the guy's body's just giving out, And at the time, you're like just thinking, control the blood, look around, what do you have to do? And you're listening to advice because you're very junior, so you don't know anything. You come out of the academy, you think you don't know much. So you're just responding to what senior officers are telling you to do. And it was just first aid for me at the time, And I just remember, like, my uniform was all blood, my arms, everything. Like, there's no time to wear gloves and things. Like, we were running, see him and just jump on top of the offender, then try to control bleeding. It was just, it wasn't a great experience. It was very sad for the guy that passed away. And it ended up being a love triangle. So what had happened was the wife was cheating on her husband, and in her infinite wisdom decides, let's bring both men together to sort this out.
Yeah, that's never gone bad in the history of mankind.
No, so I don't know how she thought this would be resolved. So the lover ends up killing the husband.
And when you said that, I expected that to be the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the lover brought a knife to this confrontation. It's a pretty decent size knife. So that was my first experience with death. I'll never forget it. And I remember it was like, that's your welcome to policing.
Yep. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And look, death is a sensory experience. There's a smell of blood.
Yeah.
Like if you get enough blood.
Yeah, you smell that iron, metallic, salty.
Yeah. It's got a particular smell to it, and it feels different to liquid. Like to water and things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, right? It's one of the things that makes death so traumatic for people is that it's a sensory thing. You're almost enveloped in that. But then, from a PTSD point of view, how often did you walk past that library or go past that library?
Every single day, because it was right next to the police station. So every single day, and like I can only imagine what those Year 12 girls went through. I think there was about 12 of them. And I remember because right then the detective's office was across the road. Yeah. So if you had opened your window as the investigations manager, you would have seen like it happen in front of you. That's how close we were. And had we not run the wrong way, my crew definitely would have got there first. Yeah. So, and you just think of all these things, like, what if?
Yeah, and I think that raises another good point. People assume the information you get with the police is really precise and really good.
Yeah.
The number of times where we've gotten bad information and it just, in your head, it kind of doesn't add up, but you don't have access to the person that's speaking to the O operator.
Yeah.
And sometimes the O operator's in like another state. And they can't make hide nor hair out of someone screaming down the line of them, or they're hearing the words wrong.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember when we worked at Campsie together. Do you remember how many times we get calls for something on the Pacific Highway, Kempsey?
Kempsey, yeah.
Which, if you know New South Wales, Kempsey's in like what people now call the inner west, but it really was part of southwest Sydney and the southwest Sydney metropolitan area. Yet Kempsey is on the north coast.
Yeah.
Very so we'd get this job and go, car accident, they beep it, and they go, and when you beep a job on the radio, it means that's like a priority job. Everybody stops in the station or in the car, all conversations stop while you listen, you hear those tones, and it comes over the radio, and they're like, Campsie car, any car in the vicinity for, person's trapped accident on Pacific Highway, Kempsey, disregard. Like it was fairly common. But those things are when seconds matter.
Yeah.
And I don't blame the radio operators, the phone, the O phone operators. it's really hard.
It's
to
a
do
tough
the
job. It's a tough
they're
job.
doing. Yeah. I actually met someone that was working as a triple operator, and she resigned because she got the wrong address, and the ambulance didn't get someone in time. And she said, even though she thought she'd done the right thing, they had the opportunity to go back and rewind and re-listen to what the person said. And she just thought she got it right, but she was like not 100% sure, didn't go back.
Yeah.
And so that kind of haunts her. And but you know, with the volume of calls Triple O get, I understand that.
Did you ever do a shift where you're the radio operator on a back channel?
Not as I did, yes, operations, right?
Yeah.
Like a few operations. But I tried to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, well, I was junior, so I was screwed. And I had to be the radio operator, right, for that shift. And so the officers on the road are giving you registrations to check and names to check. So all that happens is they tell you, and then you're typing in on the system as quick as you can to try to get then another car's waiting for you to do a check. Yes. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Respect to the people that work in VKG or the Voice of King George and back in radio, because that's a tough gig.
And to pass that assessment, what people don't know is to pass the assessment to be a police radio operator is you have to run 2 pursuits at the same time as well as monitor the other traffic on air. Now, running 1 pursuit and managing that is hard. Doing 2 is pretty damn awesome. And that means you've got to type into the broadcast information, type it in the system, get the different like powers that be over and do things like that. And yeah, it's pretty hectic. So yeah.
Did you find in your interactions with people that were deceased, was it more difficult sort of the imagery for you, or was it dealing with the people?
Yeah, it was funny. I was literally in a doctor's surgery today, and we were talking about PTSD and policing, just because he knows that I used to be in the cops and I've moved out, and he said how many police officers he's got coming to see him now who suffer PTSD. And he was talking, having worked with cadavers and things, and how he didn't really have that experience. So I said, but the experience for me has always been not being the body, right? From our own kind of perspectives, I don't know if you're exactly the same as me, Danny. My perspective is, the body is kind of like the kit that the soul wears.
Yeah,
right?
the vessel.
The vessel,
yeah.
Right. But it was so much easier to deal with that when it was just a body. But when you see how that body was important to someone else, that was there in front, and the emotion,
yes,
that's what really got to me.
Yes.
Every time, more than the blood and guts and gore that can get to you over time, but then when you understand that person in front of you had a relationship to someone will never be the same because that person is no longer around. And it's one thing when you have things that are kind of expected. It's always sad when a loved one passes away, of natural causes of old age. But it's different when someone's snatched away from you. Like they've just gone to work. Yep. And, we get tied up with life and we don't focus on those important things. And if you really thought every day was possibly your last, you probably wouldn't leave the house.
No.
But someone today, if you're listening to this at home in your car, you and I, we all know in reality someone left their home today and they're not coming back.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing that always got to me with death. My first experience with death, I worked in a hospital doing security to put myself through university before I joined the cops.
Yeah.
So I'd had quite a few interactions with death. And then, so I don't even remember my very first deceased in the police. And there's kind of this thing, some people want to blood the probationary constable. We'll take him to his first deceased.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah, we had plenty of that.
Yeah, who cares, mate?
Yeah.
Like, been there, done that.
Yeah.
But death changes the way it impacts you. It changes based, like when I became a father, death changed.
Yeah.
And the more I dealt with the families and giving those death messages, because when you're junior on a car crew, you get given what you're given. But as an inspector and a sergeant, it was my belief that death messages warranted someone of rank going and speaking to you.
Yeah, someone senior should do it.
I don't think they've ever... Did you get any training on how to give a death message?
Nah.
I didn't get any training on that. And I'm not even sure if there is a good way to do it. I've heard of some absolutely horrific ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard this story. The worst story I've heard, I think, was a guy related to me. One of the guys I was working with said he was a probationary constable and had what we'd call a barred up senior constable. So someone who'd been in the job for ages, not particularly keen on this guy, not particularly doing a lot of work, not enjoying his work, just going through the motions. Got given the task to go give a death message for a rock fisherman, and that was an Asian person, I believe. Walks up to the front door, knocks on the door, wife opens the door, and she's like, what are you doing here? He says, hey, you know your husband? He went out, went fishing today. Yeah, he's not coming back. He's dead.
Oh, wow.
See you later, and just walked off. I'm like,
that's terrible.
There's a point that you don't get training. There's a point where you just, excuse the French, you're an asshole.
Yeah, that's
right?
disgusting.
Like, I can't understand what possesses a person to do that.
Yeah.
But for me, it was about go and make sure that you honoured that person's suffering and grief and explain to them as best you could what had happened.
Yeah.
And as a detective, particularly working with people that were either in matters that were coronial matters or matters that were homicides and things involved, working with a family and talking to them, you really got to know some of those people on a better level, and then got to know the victim.
Yep.
And I think that's one of those things where it just sits heavy on you, and you want to work hard, and if you can't get the result you want. So I think that's one of those things why detectives often push so hard and get things to court and feel so gutted when they don't get a result out of that, because they feel like they've let the family down, they've let that person down. I remember got called out to a homicide in Rockdale, and it was, again, kind of like a love triangle thing. There was two overseas students living together that were actually, they were known to each other's family. I don't know if I think they may have been like distant cousins or close family friends, but they were actually in a lesbian relationship. One of them went back to the country where they'd come from. I can't remember. It was an Asian country. And she'd got engaged to a boyfriend over there because no one knew that she was, in a lesbian relationship over here. Came back, her partner here found out, and then I don't think we ever found out where she got the gun from, but the partner shot her. And killed her through the head. Just walked up in the unit and pretty much just called the cops and turned herself in.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon for a homicide investigation for the detectives to attend.
Yeah.
And I'd been to the autopsy for this lady, and taken all the notes and seen what they'd done. And then the boss says to me, like a couple of days later after the body's been released, oh yeah, can you and such and such go to the funeral? I'm like, okay, no dramas. I go to the funeral. What do we do? Oh, just pay your respects. I'm like, I feel a bit awkward, but there'll be a lot of people there, so no dramas.
Yeah.
Turn up at a Rookwood Cemetery at the crematorium, the chapel. Sorry. There is myself, my partner, 3 people, and an open casket.
Oh, no.
And, they kind of look at us like, and, they've flown in, right?
Yeah.
So they don't really know us.
Yeah.
We've got to explain why we're there. And I felt so awkward. But I also felt for that family.
Yeah.
Because for them, they've lost their daughter. Their daughter is, there's so much to answer in that culture around why was she murdered by a close family friend. Obviously, the lesbian relationship came out. I just felt, and they're holding a funeral, and the rest of her friends and family from overseas can't even come. It just felt really bad for them. But then you have those other things. I think I relayed this on TikTok. It was my last Christmas in the job. Myself and one of the sergeants I worked with, we always, quite a jovial kind of guy, but a good knockabout guy. It's like Christmas Eve morning, and we're having a coffee with a couple of car crews at Macca's. As you do, it's like 3:30 in the morning. He's like, I said, you done for the evening? Like, you got any more jobs? There's nothing going. He's like, I've got a death message to do. Okay. Where is it? What do we got? And it's two sons that have been going to up the country to a family event. They're like twins. They've had a car accident. One's deceased. One's in critical condition.
Yeah.
Unknown whether they're going to survive. And we have to go and tell this poor guy. And the thing is, in the cops, and you spend, as you know, most of your time talking to bad people, right? So when you talk to good people, you want to, you don't want to be ruining their lives. And I'm standing at this guy's doorstep knowing that the news we're going to give him is life-changing.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I got no answers for whether his son's going to survive. I know one's gone. And it's bloody Christmas, right?
Yeah.
And Christmas Eve, you can imagine, there's not a lot of services, there's not a lot of things going on.
No, and he's going to remember that Christmas every Christmas.
Exactly right. And he opens the door to see two cops at his door, right? He's a good bloke. He knows we're not there for a search warrant. We're not there for any other reason than bad news. And we take him inside and we tell him, and he's upset, but he's kind of stoic. We're like, all right, well, are you married? Is there anybody? Yeah, my wife, but my wife's in Canada with my daughter.
Yeah. It's the worst.
So then the sergeant and I have this conversation. He's like, well, why don't we ring the Mounties, in Canada and get them to give the death message to the wife? I'm like, no chance in hell, mate. Because if that was me, I'd want, first of all, trying to get a flight back from Canada to Australia at Christmas time is going to suck. But we don't know how long son number two's got to live.
Yeah.
You don't want to have that bureaucracy and chain going back and forth when we can just ring her, give her this horrible news.
Yeah.
She's got an opportunity to come back and see her son.
Yes.
So we speak to old mate, I remember him hugging, I made him a cup of tea and remember him hugging the sergeant. And we're like, okay, let's call your wife. And she was in all sorts. Like, first of all, she accused us of playing a horrible joke and was yelling at her husband because this was a terrible thing to do. And then we explained it to her, and then when it hit her, the screams.
Yeah.
I had to walk away from being near the phone because it was loud and piercing. And like, her life has come apart. Her daughter's in the room. You can hear the daughter screaming, "Mum, what's going on? What's happening?" And so I say to this guy, I'm like, mate, and of course by this time we're supposed to finish at 6. It's after 6. And I'm like, mate, who can we call for you? He's like, all my family are up there. Everybody, I was just staying here. I was going to go up on Christmas Day. My wife was with my daughter in Canada. Like, okay, who do I get for this guy? So then we go door knocking. Everybody's left. There's no one around.
Yeah, it's the worst time.
And I've got no one to help this guy, and I feel like I'm ruined his Christmas, ruined his life, and I'm just going to walk away.
Yeah.
And so they're the things that kind of haunt you, that, as you say, those points where it's that with the family,
Yeah.
Yeah. And deceased are different. Each one has a different overtone.
Definitely. I think, and when you said that it changed for you when you became a father, 100%, I resonate with that. So Sid's deaths became really tough. So Sid's sudden infant death syndrome, where you'd have a child pass away in a crib, sort of thing, and not knowing sort of what happened, or they've turned over and suffocated themselves inadvertently, and all kinds of different reasons that would lead to a Sid's death. But I remember, because I was a young or fresh dad at the time, and so it was like they were tough.
Yep.
We had a spate of them. It was I don't know. It was weird, and I'd gone to like 3 in like 3 months after never being to one ever. And that was really hard. That was really tough. And I remember one where I was a swing car. So I was a 4 p.m. car, 4 p.m. to 4 a.m.
One of the best car crews to be on, I might add.
Yeah.
Busy, but
It's fun.
fun.
Yeah. And you usually get a nice car.
Yeah.
You don't get the paddy wagon. It depends who the supervisor is. Anyway, speaking of supervisors, there's a particular interesting supervisor on that day, and I hope she's listening, because you were terrible.
Tell us what you really think.
Yeah. It was one of those sergeants that had her little favourites, and the ones that would smoke with her and do whatever. And so they got all the great sort of perks on the shift. Anyway, so that left me and my offsider to do all the work. And again, we're 4 o'clock car, so it's getting to 4 a.m. We should be coming back in to do our paperwork, but we were getting smashed. We were constantly going to jobs. Anyway, a job comes over for a deceased child, but I think he was like a preteen, maybe 11, 12, something like that. But had some medical history, had special needs, and it was I was in the station at the time, and it was a good 4 suburbs away from the station. Now I'm already in the station with my offsider doing our paperwork. So the night shift crews, there's two more night shift cars, 6 p.m. cars. They finish at 6 a.m., right?
So they've still got a couple of hours to go.
They have a couple of hours to go. And I think it's like, I don't know, 3:45, let's say. Something like that. It was really close to the end of the shift. But nobody wanted to go to this job. You know, it's obviously not a great way to end the shift to deal with a child's death. And so they broadcast it once, they broadcast it again, and the supervisor just looks at me, she goes, "What are you doing?" Like, knowing full well, I'm the 4 o'clock car, finishing up. She goes, "No, you can go." So I'm like, probably said a few things under my breath to her or in my mind. And I said to my partner, "Let's go. Like, there's no point arguing this point. We'll go." So I get there, and it was a very, very, obviously very sad situation. I'm talking to the father, because the mother was inconsolable. And the father's telling me, look, he had epilepsy, he does have seizures, but he shares a room with his brother. So there's a younger brother in the room. I think younger brother was about maybe 9 or 8 years old. And this is your only kind of witness, if that makes sense, right? So I'm trying to talk to this kid to try to work out what's going on. There's no D's on, no detectives on, right?
No.
They're
at least an hour away by the time they get called out.
And they're like making that call. Is it worth calling them out? Let's wait till day shift starts.
Because by the time you call them at 4 o'clock, they're not going to turn up till 5. Yet you could wait, and they'll come out at someone's
7.
going to start at 6 or 7.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm balancing this in my head, going, I need to get as much info as I can. Mind you, I'm not the most senior officer on this shift. They were having a nice little rest and probably having a smoke with the sergeant. But anyway, as you can see, I'm over it. It's only been 20 years. I'm talking to the younger brother, and he says to me, it was just a lot of loud snoring and like coughing, and then it was quiet. So unfortunately, the child had a seizure. The tongue had dropped to the back of his throat, blocked the epiglottis, and he'd passed away. And it happened a couple of nights prior that he was having very loud snores, and no one picked up. They didn't know. It's just unfortunate thing. So now the challenge is, what do we do with the doctor? How do we get a death certificate?
Yes.
There's all these things in play. And this is a family that, observing their religious traditions, and the body needs to be buried as soon as possible, and they would want to avoid an autopsy at all costs. Right? They want to keep the body intact. It gets washed, cleaned, and buried. They don't want him sort of under the knife to get any kind of autopsy done. So we need a doctor to actually write a certificate, being confident that it's the epileptic seizure that's taken place that's caused. But then you've got the challenge of his age, right? So you needed his treating doctor, his sort of to do that. Now the doctor, his surgery is only down the road, but again, what time is it in the morning? So I've got the radio, I've messaged the radio to call the station. They're trying to find the doctor's contact details and see if they can reach him and call him and whatever. Anyway, I'm doing everything I can to sort of manage the family. And the only one thing that the father said to me, he goes, please, I don't want an autopsy. Whatever you can do, please. And I'm like, what do you do here? Finally, they get through to the doctor. It's now, I don't know, 4:45 in the morning. I get a call from the inspector. Your overtime's not authorised. Come inside. Right? Again, just, I had a shift of winners on that day because they're paying out of their pocket. So we go back to the station. I've left my mobile number with the station crew. Like if the doctor calls, give me a call. So of course I'm getting in the car to go home, and the doctor calls. And he says, look, I'm coming to my surgery. I've got some paperwork there I'll need to look at in order to give the certificate. The doctor is of the same background and understands the need to make this happen.
Yep.
And then I was like, I was meant to be on the one that responds to this job, you know? And so he goes, can you meet me at my surgery at 6:30? So Danny's not going home. So I drive, I go to the doctor opens the surgery early. He's going through his notes. He's like, yeah, I saw him at this time, saw him at this time. This is what's happened. We've gone back to the house, he's looked at the body, and he gave the certificate. And then he wrote a letter to the coroner because the body still got transported to the coroner. And the coroner agreed no need to do an autopsy. But now it's like 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I remember going home, but with a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, I think if you're not in the cops, you don't necessarily know the different things that go into that.
Yeah.
And it's actually something, the interesting thing for me, over the many years, I've seen so many reactions to death. Everybody thinks that there's a way to act, and I've seen people that act naturally, that's natural to them. I've seen people that have stacked it on, and when I say stacked on, I mean, they're in that moment when it's about someone else, they made it about them.
Yes.
Yes. I remember one time I was a shooting victim, and it wasn't. It's one of those things, right? You play with fire, you're going to get burnt. That was this kind of individual. Mum and Dad are there, and the doctors come out and said, "Hey, we, unfortunately did our best, but he's hasn't made it." Mum's throwing herself on the ground, yelling and screaming and kicking and whatever else. And Dad says to the doctor, who's just told him that his son's died, "Can you prescribe her some Valium or something?" Really? That's... First of all, for her, why you're in the middle of a hospital, right? Your son's involved in organised crime. It's sad when anybody dies, but it wasn't like they were a good Samaritan handing out food to the poor when they got hit by a runaway vehicle, and you're throwing yourself on the ground. I've seen other people that were so, "Are you okay?" Like, no, I'm giving the news. You know what I mean? Don't have to ask about me. And some people just stoic.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're talking to them, but they've glazed over and they're responding. They're conscious, but you can kind of tell like there's something not going on there. I've seen all manner of things. Have you seen that? Like, is that what you saw?
Absolutely. I definitely saw the wailing and stuff with some families.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are just very reserved and contemplative, I suppose. The children's one were always the hardest.
Yes.
That was always very emotional, very tough. Road trauma as well. I found any serious car accident, because again, it's a sudden death. You're not expecting this.
Yeah.
And if it's been multiple members of the same family
at
the same time, they were very tough to deal with.
And the other thing that just came to mind was there's a whole operational safety issue right there. And that is, it's not uncommon for you to give someone a death message, and depending on who that person is and how they respond,
they get angry.
Rage.
Yeah.
And you're the guy there.
Yeah.
Why didn't you stop it? Or why did you do... Or heaven forbid if police were involved, or they were anti-police.
Yeah.
You know, they're engaged in crime, they've done whatever, they've got a stance against the police. It's your fault. You may not have even been there. It could be in another state, but you're the police.
Well, sometimes, unfortunately, the ones I went to was the police that shot the offender,
Yep.
and he died.
Yep.
And going to deliver that death message.
I've never had to do that, but I always pitied the person that had to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's not easy.
No.
That was very tough.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is. It is really one of those things that's so different. And I think the other thing that strikes me about your story in particular, talking about that child, is what people don't understand is what's the difference between a coronial investigation and a murder brief. And sometimes they're really hard because it can go days.
Yeah.
I've had jobs where we've called out an entire homicide team. We're all working on it for a couple of days and waiting for a post-mortem just to come back and go, oh no, it's all good, no foul play.
Yeah.
But you'd prefer to do that than go, hang on, what? It's gone for an autopsy, everybody's like, oh, coronial brief, we're all good, and then, no, it's a murder. Like, oh no, you know, like you've just screwed it. But there are so many deaths. And especially when you find someone alone in their house, windows open, you know, because it's summertime or something, and you're like, I don't know.
And that's the thing, like there's each setting is its own element, right? Like nothing would have prepared you to go, number one, to seeing someone die in front of you. Number two, having someone die in your arms. And then number three, having to go and deliver death messages to family members and people about not just, you know, you expect that it's probably someone older, you know, there was their time, natural causes, because we do that a lot too. We go to every death, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's not something you think of if we want to be a police officer, that you're like, I'm going to go and there's going to be so much jobs surrounding death to do with me, right?
Yeah.
And then it's the weird and bizarre situations, you know, a human body can get itself in, where after it's been left for a long time after deceased, and then the state that it's in.
And you can't tell if there's wounds, you can't tell if they've fallen and hit their head or if it was blunt force trauma or what.
And then you've got the smells you've got to deal with, the sights. You know, even and dealing with suicides was really tough as well. You know, and it's difficult because sometimes you're walking into the scene with that family member.
Yep.
And you can't sort of you can't do that sort of shock.
No.
You just, it's funny how quickly you learn to just reserve your impulses and you just stay professional, walk through, keep a straight face, do what you need to do, you know, take observations, take notes, take photos, ask pertinent questions. But in the back of your mind, I'm like, what the hell is this?
I actually had the complete kind of opposite of that so one of the things you need to understand is whenever there's a coronial kind of matter, a death, a detective has to attend.
Yeah.
Right? Now, like you said, on night shift, after a certain hour, detectives just aren't on generally. So I remember I was a duty officer and I'm looking after a couple of commands, and the supervisor who I know from the other command rings me and goes, hey boss, you're a D, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, we've got a deceased, looks good, but can you come, when I said looks good, as in, doesn't look like there's any foul play, can you come over to this address and just do the detective assessment of the scene? I'm like, yeah, no worries. I just grab a coffee and I'll head over. It's, 3 a.m, is what it is, housing commission unit. So I turn up, park out the front, walk through this labyrinth of things, coffee in hand. He's standing at the door, I'm like, oh, yeah. He's like, yeah, just inside, turn right, down the bedroom in there. Okay, cool, mate. Open the door, drinking my coffee. As I walk in, he didn't tell me the family had turned up and they're sitting in the lounge room.
Oh, no. There's you with a coffee walking in.
And here's me with a coffee, just like, sorry for your loss. I've just got to check something. And I'm like, oh. But it didn't even strike me that walking into a crime scene with a potential crime scene, a death, with a coffee was a bad thing right up until that moment.
Yeah.
It's just...
You just get conditioned.
Yeah,
you get conditioned.
You do it, you forget about it. And it was funny, not long before I left the police, there was they started keeping track of where people had been and how many deaths they'd seen. And I think in the space of 2.5 or 3 months, I'd topped the command for the number of deaths I'd attended. I'd attended over 60.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things like, I was on nights and there was no other detective, or I'd always go to check out those things to make sure the team were doing right, make sure that I was looked after and they were getting through it. And then I was like, it does. It takes a bit of a toll after a while, but you can go two ways. You can go really over the hill and this is affecting you, or you can just get so complacent, but that doesn't mean it's not affecting you, it just means it's not on the surface.
And just, it's weird what you get used to, and then I don't remember getting trained at the academy on a lot of things, but I don't remember getting
It's funny 'cause
trained
it's true.
in terms of, for example, carbon monoxide poisoning.
No.
So that where the person's closed all the windows, is in the garage, there's no air going anywhere, and just turn on the car and let the exhaust sort of, eventually he'll pass out and he dies from carbon monoxide poisoning, and the body goes a certain way, goes a certain colour, has a certain smell to it as well. And your initial reaction is to go in through that door and then go check it out. But you forget, hey, there's no oxygen in there.
Yeah.
You could be next. And I remember being told by a senior officer that was with me on shift, 2 shifts prior, how there was some job and this was what it was. 2 days later, I go to the exact same job.
Yep.
Exactly what it was. And then I remembered, open the windows. Open the garage before I go in.
It's one of the last deceased where I saw police doing trying to resusc this guy. He'd done something similar.
Yeah.
And basically they dragged him out of the room he was in, and they tried to do CPR on him, you got to ventilate. And they had, but I walked in there and I was still hit by a wall, the fumes. And here's this young girl working her ass off trying to do CPR. And I'm like, I'll jump in. She's like, no, I got this. All right, it's up to you. Ambos were walking in behind me. I wasn't terribly concerned by that, but I remember his wife coming home and she was just livid. But again, go back to that point of she's trying to punch on with us.
Yeah.
Police have not had any interaction with this guy before.
Yeah.
And I get she was upset. He'd sought help, right, and hadn't gotten any.
Yeah.
But that wasn't us. And I understand her response, but I often found that really hard to deal with, to hold my cool and my calm. When someone's yelling and screaming at you and you're like, but I'm here to help.
Yeah.
Took a lot of self-control not to say anything and just to say.
And I think it's one of the biggest things that police, I think, aren't equipped for early in their career, is just delivering death messages in the first place, how to respond to death, the reactions you need to expect. They do that sort of in officer survival in the academy, sort of be careful in certain situations.
Yeah, but they're more talking about be ready to grab your appointments and go.
Yeah, because they might actually go from sad to rage really quickly. But then the body in different states, and just it's a whole chapter of policing that I feel like is never prepared, the right way in terms of training, but then also management after the fact.
Yeah.
And I think you do the people that are senior, the good ones will always trying to say they'll take it. This is a job we should take, or at least attend and try and sort out and help out and mentor a bit.
Yeah.
But if when that doesn't happen, it's a lot of pressure on a junior officer. It's a lot of pressure.
That's right, and also potentially a reputational issue for the cops. If you have that guy like we talked about, that senior constable would turn up.
That's disgusting.
You'd just love to punch that guy in the face.
Yeah.
But what's the organisation doing that you're letting that happen?
Exactly.
That you're not finding these, auditing this space and trying to train people and show people how to do it appropriately.
Yeah.
But then, what's that person going to tell everybody in their community?
Oh yeah, forget it. That's hatred for the rest of your life. Yeah.
And deservedly so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think on this kind of sort of topic, it's a sad one, it's a serious one, but it's also it's a fact of life in terms of frontline emergency services all across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't matter what emergency service you're a part of, this is something you're going to come across.
Yeah.
The only difference is the police have the added challenge of working out what happened, and then doing a lot of the post work with family and kin later on. And hats off to everyone that deals with that stuff, because it's very, very, very difficult part of work. And it's funny, like you look at all other jobs, and if you usually something requires, a lot more diligence, it requires a lot more work, a lot more stress and pressure. There's a lot more money involved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely no benefit financially or any other perk that comes with doing this kind of work. You could have 7 shifts of this stuff,
Yeah.
compared to someone who had 7 shifts of watching Netflix in an outstation, right? Because
Yeah.
there's 7 slow nights or whatever, and they get paid exactly the same.
And look, one of the final things I want to say is perspective. It was so good to have that perspective. My lovely wife, I'd come home, and she's more in an academic / corporate role. And one day I remember we both come home, and she's like, "Oh, I had the worst day." And I looked at her. I think I'd been to 2 or 3 deceased that day, and she's like, ran through all her stuff, and it was just petty office politics. And I'm like, okay, anybody die today in your world? No. Okay. Well, that was my day. Just think about how lucky you are to come home to us.
Yep.
And I wasn't having a crack at her. It was more of that. It was just the
Perspective.
You come home, you hug your kids, you recognise just how lucky you are that you got to come home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, on that note, hope everyone in the emergency services stays safe and is dealing, with their mental health in the right way. Thank you for listening. As always, subscribe, like, share, ask us questions via Instagram, send us DMs, or you can visit our website at
www.privateinvestigatorSydney.com.au.
See you next time.